Man, what a beautiful, beautiful film it is, and a beautiful job you guys did on it.
Are we on yet?
You're totally on. You're totally on. I was hoping you had heard some of the applause for the end of the film, but
No.
This microphone's the only. There it goes.
So
We have a very enthusiastic response in this audience, and it's a good house today, so that's great. So I want to jump right in. I'll start with you, Richard. What is it about Maine? Your pictures, you identify these people in Maine somehow that have a really broad significance for the rest of the country. How's that happening?
Well, Maine is a land of it's vacation land, they say, but it's also a very safe. It feels to me like so comfortable, so much like home. It is home. I mean, I grew up, on Long Island, in Oceanside. Now, not the East End, but this is home, and there's so much creativity going on in the state. It's so many artists and so much history of art, which Rob could tell you more about than I can. But there's Marsden Hartley and so many others, Robert Indiana, and but it's
Porter.
Of course, there's just so much art here, and it's in large part, I think, because the land is so lush, and the coastline is so rough, so rocky and raw. And nature is just like right at your doorstep all the time. And I think artists are just so inspired by nature. I know that Rob and Reggie are definitely inspired by nature.
And so how did you get onto the Rob story to begin with in the very beginning? Because you've obviously been with him for a while working on this film. So how did you get onto it to start?
And not only working on this film, I mean, Rob and I have been collaborating on many films together before Rob became a subject. I mean, we were waiting and waiting and waiting for Rob to grow older in order for him to qualify as a subject of ours. I met Rob. He lives 10 minutes away on the same river, the Bagaduce River, which is another beautiful spot in Maine. And you can't turn around without seeing another gorgeous place to experience. And my wife and daughter bought a piece of his, a painting of his Surrealistic Art, which he was doing so much of, prior to getting involved in Americans Who Tell the Truth. And so Angie, our daughter, said, I want to see more of his work. And so the gallerist, Susan Mosh, said, well, here's his address, here's his phone number. Melody, the co-producer of this film and the interviewer of Rob in many ways, called him up and said, can we come over and say hello and see your work? And so they went over there, and Rob is so welcoming and he showed him all of his work at the time. And he mentioned that they have a video, or my wife mentioned that, her husband is a film producer, director, editor. And he says, oh, we're looking for an editor. Because Rob had started, along with another woman, Deb Vedetti, a series of an archive of artists, because older artists were beginning to die off. It happens. It happens to the best of us. And so he wanted to document these artists and the wisdom of these artists before they all, fly away. And so next thing I knew, he arrived at my doorstep with an armful of Betacam videos. And Betacam is like, the big pieces of video. And we started making our first film on the artist, Robert Hamilton. And I'd be, he'd bring his carrots and I'd bring my dark chocolate, and we would laugh, and the laughter would never end. And we made this most wonderful film about Robert Hamilton, who was a fighter pilot in World War II. And for 36 years, he taught painting at RISD, right across the sound from you guys.
Right.
And so that's how it started. And then just one left, one after the other, we were collaborating.
That's fantastic. So right to you, Rob. The surrealistic art was going on for how long in your career in terms of how many years before you started on this project?
Oh, I guess about 25. I mean, that was what I thought I was called to do, was explore mystery and ambiguity.
Well, I for one would love to see more of that work, because there was a little bit of a tease in the beginning when it was showing what you were doing before, and I thought it was really beautiful, and I would love to see more of that.
Thank you.
But and your son, I guess it's your son, said that it was the Iraq War that sort of turned the tables for you.
It was the run up to the Iraq War with, with our government actually lying to the American people about the reasons for that war, and I was so distraught about what was happening and that they were being allowed to get away with it. That the major media wasn't questioning what they were doing. These were war crimes, and I was just at this place where I felt incredibly alienated from this country. And I thought either I should leave the country or I should just devote myself full time to being a better citizen. And it had to be done with the thing that I do best, which is paint. And then it took me months to figure out just a very simple solution, which was to, instead of ranting one more day about Dick Cheney, I could begin to surround myself with Americans that made me feel proud, that gave me courage, that gave me hope, that inspired me to be a better activist myself. And so I began to build this company of people, and it was going to be very private at first, really a therapeutic project. But I showed the first 10, and the response was so positive that I thought, oh, I'm touching a nerve here, that other people need the same thing that I need. They need to be reassured that there's something good about this country, and there's a history of that, and we can see it through these people, and through them also we can understand why they were necessary. What the forces were that were causing us to have rampant injustice in the country, and then who had the courage to fight against it.
That's really inspiring. And going right to the end of the film, in terms of reaction, when you say like what the arts could do, and we don't have the right to remain silent. And what your paintings seem to do, for me, what the whole film does also, is to hold us accountable, because how can we have the right to remain silent when these people did not, in the face of the injustice that they were facing, the face of the inequality and the other things that they were looking at. So that's an interrelationship between the filmmaking and the paintings, because Richard, you're serving that cause at the same time by what can art do? The filmmaking art can do the broadcasting of the message that Rob is telling and that Reggie's participating in. So it all comes together in a very beautiful way. So was the first painting Sojourner Truth, or was the first painting Walt Whitman? I wasn't quite clear on that.
It was Walt Whitman. It was actually Walt. I can blame Walt Whitman for the whole thing.
Well, we can all blame Walt Whitman for a lot, I think.
Well, I was wondering how I was going to respond in art, and looked up at the studio wall, where I have, like a lot of artists, a wall full of postcards and things tacked up to look at later. And there was this quote from Walt, the one that's scratched into the painting: "This is what you shall do: love the earth, the sun, and the animals." And I, as soon as I read that, I thought, that's it. I'm going to paint his portrait. I'm going to scratch those words into it. I'm going to feel better. And at the time, I thought it would be the only portrait, but Sojourner, I think, was the second or third one.
Okay. So, and you also, it's mentioned in the film that you were making the surrealistic art, but you had never painted a portrait in your life. So was there a learning curve there, or did you just jump right in and it was no problem?
Well, I jumped right in. I mean, I'm a self-taught artist, so I'm used to teaching myself things. And I also, in my surreal art, I did a lot of realistic renderings of things. So I knew how to look at something, and I knew how to make something real as it needed to be. And so I just used the same techniques that I was using as a surrealist, and my ability to see well. that I thought, I mean, frankly, I just thought I can do this. You know, I have the skills. I just haven't done other portraits. And so I tried out Walt, and it came out pretty well. And I thought, yeah, this is something I can do.
Okay, so you've made, say at the beginning, you've made 10 portraits that you started with, and Sojourner Truth was one of those. But as is made clear in the film, the message of Sojourner Truth is shot through every single thing, which is like finding the weasel.
Exactly.
So what other things in the first 10 would you say were instrumental, or are they all equally instrumental in looking at the big picture? And where did you put those 10 paintings that you saw the response, that you saw what was going on?
Well, some of the other first ones were, let's see, Frederick Douglass, of course. I mean, I was painting mostly 19th century people. Mother Jones, the great labor organizer. But then I added in a few contemporary people. Howard Zinn was still alive, you know, the author of The People's History of the United States. And he was a really key figure for me, because when I started this, I had this idea, well, I'm going to paint this series of portraits. I'm going to call it Americans Who Tell the Truth. And then I started to paint, and I thought, well, who the hell am I going to paint? I mean, who are these people? I mean, the title was great, but I need to have some victims. And of course, if you read The People's History, you read about many of the people I've painted. You know, many of them who are left out of the mainstream educational system, but are key figures in the history of this country about, you know, fighting for the rights for everyone, to try to make the ideals real for everyone. And so Howard Zinn was a really important first painting.
And then where did the 10 paintings go?
Well, I showed them in a sandwich shop in Ellsworth, Maine, on the strip in Ellsworth, Maine.
Perfect. That's where it all begins.
Well, you know, the thing about these paintings is I call them democratic paintings, and they like to be where people are. And they've been in movie theaters, they've been in pizza parlors, they've been, you know, in sandwich shops. They've been all kinds of places. And I love it that they're there. I mean, they do make it to a few museums, but that's not really where they want to be. I think they really want to be in very pedestrian places where regular folks can see them and have them talk to them.
Well, I think that is a big part of the conversation now anyway, which is that is art reserved for the people that can go to museums and galleries. So, and when you're having a show, a sandwich shop is the right place for we the people to see what's going on, and maybe check out those original ideas. That sandwich shop is our original ideas, really, is what we can all get together in one place. I want to talk to Reggie for a second, because one of the things you just said is that people that are left out of the educational process. So you're finding in the people's history, you find people that aren't mentioned in other education. And one of the things that Reggie said that was so impressive was, yes, not just what people have forgotten, but what they were prevented from knowing. So Reggie, do you want to expand on that a little bit?
Well, I do a lot of work in schools. One of the reasons I met Dick actually was I was doing work with the Kennedy Center in Washington. I was part of their Changing Education Through the Arts program. And the program that I first took into the schools was the Underground Railroad. And you're talking about people, you know, black, white, you know, different races, different backgrounds, who stood up at a time when all of our leaders, our presidents and Congress, were sanctioning slavery. And these people stood up at a time when it was not only not popular to stand up, but it was against the law to stand up. And those names all through history are not taught. You know, in all of the various places that we could be teaching about ways to represent the truth and the truth itself, we find that in our schools, we don't celebrate that. We celebrate the myth of our founding, and we celebrate all of those things that continue to make the power base in America prosperous. So it's something that I began to embrace and had the opportunity to begin to look at people in the civil rights movement and look at people. Of course, this film, the reason I love it so much is the broad base of people that Rob has painted that we see, and, you know, introducing it to audiences. I've shown it to a few of the audiences of my girlfriend's family. I showed it over Thanksgiving. And to a person almost, they had no idea who these people were. and they are, fairly well-educated people. So that's the mission, to lift these people up and to lift up their message, because as we have seen in our most recent days, it has really come to fruition that people become aware and they get angry about that, and they don't quite know what to do with that anger. So I think that Rob's story is also one that we can use our skills and we can use our passions in ways that dissipate the anger, but give us some place to take all of this.
Yeah, I think that's so true. And another thing that, Rob, that you're talking about in the beginning, and that I think that this film really helps to do, is to break down the silos. Talking about how individual people are activists and seeking essentially the same thing, but from different perspectives. And as is the case in many kinds of activism, it's getting people to all work together, because it looks a little bit different what they're asking for, but it winds up being pretty much the same thing. So a lot of that has happened because of the range of paintings that you've made for different sort of causes, all about chasing the weasel, I guess, to some extent. And the film does that too by illustrating all those things. In some of, how did your activism get started? Because I see you getting arrested at one point. I know you're going into schools and doing a lot of things like that, but the film goes to a lot of these, gets either footage that was fresh shot by Richard or obtained from some of these actions that were taken. But then you're there, Rob, in some of these actions. So when did you start to get actively involved in this struggle sort of what's going on here?
Very early in life. I was a high school student when I first organized a struggle to integrate my high school. I grew up in Cincinnati, Ohio. I went to an all-white high school. Was pretty unhappy about that, and organized and successfully to integrate the high school. And then a couple of years later in college, I was very active in the anti-Vietnam war movement. And so it was something that I've been doing ever since I was a kid, really. And I had an older brother who went to Mississippi in 1964 as part of the Freedom Summer. And that was a huge inspiration to me. I mean, I was too young to go myself, but I learned a whole lot about this country and about the necessity of courageous citizenship at that point. And I just wanted to say something about what you said earlier about the getting out of our silos. And that was one thing that I wasn't really thinking about when I started this. I mean, I we're being led into it, but after one portrait, it began to lead me in all these different directions, because once you start to identify a certain kind of injustice that is denying the dignity to people, all people, you realize that it requires the same kind of courage to confront that indignity, to confront that injustice, and try to change it. And so, just one story led to another story, and then you begin to see, as Reggie suggested, that the power behind all these injustices is related and often the same, and that's why they're all related the way they are.
Yeah, and I think that breaking them down requires everybody to get on the same train and bring it into the station. So we don't have a lot of time. I'm sorry to say that, but I just was told there wasn't much time. But I'd like to get at least one or two questions from our audience that I can relay to you. So anyone have a question? Okay, so we don't have any questions. So that means I can keep going. So the critical part, or a critical part of this, because there's a lot of critical pieces to this puzzle, but you talk about it's not about teaching people to hate the country for all the bad things that have happened. It's about teaching people to love the ideals, and in a way, all the messages of the people that you have painted and that you scratch in, and then that's just a little tip of the iceberg that you're scratching in there of what they have to say, is their reactions to the ideals being broken. So that you have to love the ideals. You can't help but love the ideals when you see people saying, what about those ideals? Why are we doing this? Why are we not honoring those things? And yes, it would be lovely to see what kind of a country we'd have if the founding fathers had embrace the ideals fully. But given the fact that, and I'm not trying to excuse them, but they were victims of their time to a certain extent, that they didn't have a clue, and none of us could have seen what was going to happen down the road, obviously. But just such a magnificent piece of work that you guys put together here.
Do I have time to say one thing?
Yes, please do.
Well, I mean, I'm really pleased you identified that statement in the film. That's a key part of it. I mean, it's maybe one of the most important, because, you know, people in the power structure have tried to paint activists for years as people who hate this country, you know, who despise it. That's why they're socialists or communists or whatever they are. When in fact, it's just the opposite. You know, they're people who so love the ideals of this country that they want to make them real for everyone. And that is exceedingly important.
I think it's the whole thing. And I think that you guys have made such a beautiful piece here together, working together in ways and showing us the ways that we all have to work together. And what we can do as individuals is if we have the arts and we can bear witness, then we can do that. And if we don't have the arts, then we have to find other ways, because your paintings and your work is holding us all accountable, and as does the future, the next generation. So I love those young people paintings. Those are so fabulous. And I love to see you working with the schools. So keep going, guys. And I hope this film gets a lot of people to see it. And I hope it gets a lot of train rolling. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank
so
you.
much.
That's great.
Ignite the fire within our gut, as Sherry Mitchell said.
Thanks
Thank
very
you,
much.
thank you.
Thanks so much. Really appreciate it.